All right, buckle in. Chapter 14. See, conventionally, it is not only that we think and act and speak and dress alike, but of our surrender to social attempt at entity in which we are only supercellular. We see that it is proper that we should see. It is orthodox enough to say that a horse is not a horse or an infant, any more than is an orange to the unsophisticated. It's interesting to walk along a street sometimes and look at things and wonder what they'd look like if we hadn't been taught to see horses and trees and houses and horses and trees and houses. I think that to supersight, they are local stresses merging indistinguishably into one another in an all inclusive nexus. I think that it would be credible enough to say that many times have Monstrator and Elvira and Azuria. Okay, I have to say that many times Monstrator and Elvira and Aziria crossed telescopic fields of vision and were not even seen because it wouldn't be proper to see them. It wouldn't be respectable and it wouldn't be respectful. It wouldn't be respectable. Say it wouldn't be respectable and it wouldn't be respectful. It would be insulting to old bones to see them. It would bring in evil influences from the relics of St. Isaac to see them. But our data of vast worlds that are orbitless, or that are navigable, or that are adrift in an interplanetary tides and currents, the data that we shall have of their approach in modern times within 5 or 6 miles of this Earth. Then their visits or approaches to other planets or to other of the few regularized bodies that have surrounded to the attempted entity of this solar system as a whole. The very question that we can't very well evade: have these other worlds or superconstructions ever been seen by astronomers? I think there would not be much approximation to the realness in taking refuge in the notion of astronomers who stare and squint and see only that which it is respectable and respectful to see. It is all very well to say that astronomers are hypnotics, and that an astronomer looking at the moon is hypnotized by the moon, but our acceptance is that the bodies of this present expression often visit the moon or cross it, or are held in temporary suspension near it, and some of them must often have been within the diameter of an astronomer's hypnosis. General expression that upon the oceans of this earth there are regularized vessels, but also that there are tramp vessels. That upon the super ocean there are regularized planets, but also that there are tramp worlds. That astronomers are like mercantile purists who would deny commercial vagabondage. Acceptance is that vast celestial vagabonds have been excluded by astronomers primarily because their irresponsibilities are an affront to the pure and the precise, or to attempted positivism, and secondarily because they have not been seen so very often. The planets steadily reflect the light of the sun upon this uniformity. A system that we call primary astronomy has been built up. Now, the subject matter of advanced astronomy is data of celestial phenomena that are sometimes light and sometimes dark, varying like some of the satellites of Jupiter, but with a wider range. However, light or dark, they have been seen and reported so often that the only important reason for their exclusion is that they don't fit in. With dark bodies that are probably external to our own solar system, I have in the provincialism that no one can escape not much concern. Dark bodies afloat in our outer space would have been damned a few years ago, but now they're sanctioned by Professor Barnard. And if he says they're all right, you may think of them without the fear of doing something wrong or ridiculous. The close kinship we note so often between the evil and the absurd. I suppose by the ridiculous I mean the froth of evil, the dark companion of Algol, for instance, though that's a clear case of celestial miscegenation. The purists or positivists admit that's so. In the Proceedings of the National Academy of Science 1915-394, Professor Barnard writes of an object. He calls it an object in Cepheus. His idea is that there are dark, opaque bodies outside this solar system, but in the Astrophysical Journal 1916-1, he modifies into regarding them as dark nebula. That's not so interesting. We accept that Venus, for instance, has often been visited by other worlds or by superconstructions from which some cinders and coke and coal, that sometimes these things have reflected light and have been seen from this earth by professional astronomers. It will be noted that throughout this chapter our data are accursed Brahmins, as the hypnosis and inertia we keep on saying, just as a good many of the scientists of the 19th century kept on admitting the power of the system that preceded them, or continuity, would be smashed. There's a big chance here for us to be instantaneously translated to the positive absolute. Oh well. What I emphasize here is that our damn data are observations by astronomers of the highest standing, excommunicated by the astronomers of similar standing, but backed up by the dominant spirit of their era, to which all minds had to equilibrate or be negligible, unheard, submerged. It would seem sometimes in this book as if our revolts were against the dogmatisms and pontifications of single scientists of eminence. This is only a convenience because it seems necessary to personify. If we look over philosophical transactions or the publications of the Royal Astronomical Society, for instance, we see that Herschel, for instance, was as powerless as any boy stargazer to enforce acceptance of any observation of his that did not harmonize with the system that was growing up as independently of him and all other astronomers. As a phase in the development of an embryo compels all cells to take on appearances concordingly with the design and the predetermined progress and schedule of the whole. Visitors of Venus. Evans, Way of the Planets, page 140. That in 1645, a large body enough to look like a satellite was seen near Venus. 4 times in the first half of the 18th century, a similar observation was reported. The last report occurred in 1767. A large body has been seen 7 times, according to the Science Gossip 1886-178 near Venus. At least one astronomer, Hausu, accepted these observations and named the world planet superconstruction Neth. His views are mentioned in passing but without endorsement in the Trans New York Academy 5-249. Hausu, or someone writing for the magazine section of the Sunday newspaper, Outer Darkness for both alike. A new satellite in this solar system might be a little disturbing, though the formulas of Laplace, which were considered final in his day, have survived the admittance of 500 or 600 bodies not included in those formulas. A satellite to Venus might be a little disturbing, but would be explained. But a large body approaching a planet, staying a while, going away, coming back some other time, anchoring as it were. Azuria is pretty bad, but Azuria is no worse than Nith. Astrophysical Journal 1-127. A light-reflecting body or a bright spot near Mars seen November 25, 1894 by Professor Pickering and others at the Lowell Observatory above an unilluminated part of Mars, self-luminous. It would seem thought to have been a cloud, but estimated to have been about 20 miles away from the planet. Luminous spot seen moving across the disk of Mercury in 1799 by Harding and Schroeder. The first bulletin issued by the Lowell Observatory in 1903, Professor Lowell describes a body that was seen on the terminator of Mars, May 20th, 1903. On May 27th, it was suspected If still there, it had moved, we're told, about 300 miles, probably a dust cloud. Very conspicuous and brilliant spots seen on the disk of Mars, October and November 1911. So one of them accepted 6 or 7 observations that were in agreement, except that they could not be regularized upon the world. Planet satellite, he gave it a name. He named it Neith. Monstrator and Elvira, and Azuria and Super Romanius, or heresy and orthodoxy and the oneness of all quasiness, and our ways and means and methods are the very same. Or, if we name things that may not be, we are not of lonely guilt in the nomenclature of absences. But now Leverrier and Vulcan. Leverrier again. Or to demonstrate the collapsibility of the froth, stick a pin in the largest bubble of it, astronomy and inflation. And by inflation, we mean expansion of the attenuated. Or that the science of astronomy is a phantom film distended with myth stuff, but always our acceptance that it approximates higher to substantiality than did the system that preceded it. So Leverrier and the planet Vulcan. And we repeat, and it will do us small good to repeat, if you be of the masses, that the astronomers have hypnotized, being themselves hypnotized, or they could not hypnotize others, or that the hypnotist's control is not the masterful power that it is popularity supposed to be, but only transference of state from one hypnotic to another. If you be of the masses that the astronomers have hypnotized, you will not be able even to remember. 10 pages from here, and Leverrier and the planet Vulcan will have fallen from your mind like beans from a magnet, or like data of cold meteorites from the mind of a Thomson. Leverrier and the planet Vulcan, and much the good it will do us to repeat it. But at least temporarily we shall have an impression of a historic fiasco such as, in our acceptance, could occur only in the quasi-existence. In 1859, Dr. Lescarbault, an amateur astronomer of Orgères, France, announced that upon March 26th of that year, he had seen a body of planetary size cross the sun. We are in the subject that is now as unholy to the present system as ever were its own subjects to the system that preceded it, or as ever were the slanders against miracles up to the preceding system. Nevertheless, few textbooks go so far as quite to disregard this tragedy. The method of the systematists is slightingly to give a few instances of the unholy and dispose of the few. If it were desirable to them to deny that there are mountains upon this earth, they would record a few observations upon some slight eminences near Orange, New Jersey, but say that commuters, though estimable persons in several ways, are likely to have their observations mixed. The textbooks casually mention a few of the supposed observations upon Vulcan, and then pass on. Dr. Lescarbault wrote to Leverrier, who hastened to Orgères, because this announcement assimilated with his own calculations upon a planet between Mercury and the Sun, because the solar system itself has never attained positiveness in the aspect of regularity. There are to Mercury, as there are to Neptune, phenomena irreconcilable with the formulas or motions that betray influence by something else. We are told that Leverrier satisfied himself as to the substantial accuracy of the reported observation. The story of this investigation is told in Monthly Notices 20-98. It seems too bad to threaten the native little thing with our rude sophistications, but it is amusingly of the ingenuousness of the age from which present dogmas have survived. Lescarbault wrote to Leverrier. Leverrier hastened to Orgères, but he was careful not to tell Lescarbault who he was. Went right in and subjected Dr. Lescarbault to a very severe cross-examination. just the way you and I may feel at liberty to go into anybody's home and be severe with people, pressing him hard step by step, just as anyone might go into someone else's house and press him hard, though unknown to the hard-pressed one. Not until he was satisfied did Leverrier reveal his identity. I suppose Dr. Lesserbolt expressed astonishment. I think there's something utopian about this. It's so unlike the standoffishness of New York life. Leverrier gave the name Vulcan to the object that Dr. Lescarbault had reported, by the same means by which he is, even to this day, supposed by the faithful. I have discovered Neptune. He already had announced the probable existence of an inertial mercurial body or a group of bodies. He had 5 observations besides Lescarbault's upon something that had been seen to cross the sun, in accordance with the mathematical hypnosis of his era. He studied these 6 transits. Out of them he computed elements, giving Vulcan a period of about 20 days, or a formula for heliocentric longitude at any time. But he placed the time of best observation away up in 1877. But even so, or considering that he still had probably a good many years to live, it may strike one that he was a little rash. That is, if one has not gone very deep into the study of hypnosis, that having discovered Neptune by a method which, in our acceptance, had no more to recommend it than had once equally well thought of methods, of which finding he should not have taken such chances, that if he was right as to Neptune, but should be wrong as to Vulcan, his average would be way below that of most fortune tellers, who could scarcely hope to do business upon a 50% basis. All that the reasoning of a tyro in hypnosis. Date, March 22nd, 1877. The scientific world was up on its hind legs, nosing the sky. The thing had been done so authoritatively. Never a pope had said a thing with more of the seeming of finality. If 6 observations correlated, what more could be asked for? The editor of Nature, a week before the predicted event, though cautious, said that it is difficult to explain how 6 observers unknown to one another could have data that could be formulated if they were not related phenomena. In a way, at this point occurs the crisis of our whole book. Formulas are against us. But can astronomic formulas, backed up by observations in agreement, taken many years apart, calculated by Leverrier, be as meaningless in a positive sense as all other quasi-things that we have encountered so far? The preparations they made before March 22nd, 1877 in England, the Astronomer Royal made it the expectation of his life. Notified observers at Madras, Melbourne, Sydney, and New Zealand, and arranged with observers in Chile and the United States. M. Struve had prepared for observations in Serbia and Japan. March 22nd, 1877. Not absolutely hypocritically, I think it's pathetic myself. If anyone should doubt the sincerity of Leverrier in this matter, we note, whether it has meaning or not, that a few months later he died. I think we'll take up Monstrator, though there's so much to this subject that we'll have to come back. Great. According to the Annual Register 9-120, upon the 9th of August 1762, M. de Rostand of Basly, France, was taking altitudes of the sun at Lausanne. He saw a vast spindle-shaped body, about 3 of the sun's digits in breadth and 9 in length, advancing slowly across the disk of the sun, or at no more than half the velocity with which the ordinary solar spots move. It did not disappear until the 7th of September, when it reached the sun's limb. Because of the spindle-like form, I incline to think of a super zeppelin. But another observation, which seems to indicate that it was a world, is that, though it was opaque and ellipsed the sun, it had around it a kind of nebulosity or atmosphere. A penumbra would ordinarily be a datum of a sunspot, but there are observations that indicate that this object was at a considerable distance from the sun. It is recorded that another observer at Paris watching the sun at this time had not seen this object, but that M. Crost at Seoul, about 45 German leagues northward from Lausanne, had seen it, describing the same spindle form, but disagreeing a little as to its breadth. Then comes the important point that he and M. de Rostan did not see it upon the same part of the sun. This, then, is parallax, and compounded with invisibility at Paris is great parallax, or that, in the course of a month in the summer of 1762, a large opaque spindle-shaped body traversed the disk of the sun, but at a great distance from the sun. The writer of the Register says, in a word, we know of nothing to have recourse to in the heavens by which to explain this phenomenon. I suppose he was not a hopeless addict to explaining. Extraordinary. We fear he must have been a man of loose habits in some other respects. As to us, Monstrator, in the monthly notices of the R.A.S. February 1877, Leverrier, who never lost faith up to the last day, gives the 6 observations upon an unknown body of planetary size that he had formulated. Fritsch, October 10th, 1802. Stark, October 9th, 1819. De Cuppis, October 30th, 1839. Side Botham, November 12th, 1849. Lescarbault, March 26th, 1859. Loomis, March 20th, 1862. If we weren't so accustomed to science in an essential aspect of disregard, we'd be mystified and impressed, like the editor of Nature, with the formulation of these datum. Agreement of so many instances would seem incredible as a coincidence, but our acceptance is that with just enough disregard, astronomers and fortune tellers can formulate anything, or we'd engage ourselves to formulate periodicities in the crowds in Broadway. Say that every Wednesday morning a tall man with one leg and a black eye carrying a rubber plant passes the Singer Building a 10:15. Of course, it couldn't really be done unless such a man did have such periodicity, but if some Wednesday mornings it should be a small child lugging a barrel or a fat negress with a week's wash, by ordinary disregard, that would be prediction good enough for the kind of quasi-existence we're in. So whether we accuse or whether we think that the word accuse overdignifies an attitude towards a quasi-astronomer or mere figment in the superdream, our acceptance is that Leverrier never did formulate observations, that he picked out observations that could be formulated. That of this type are all formulas. That if Leverrier had not been himself helplessly hypnotized, or if he had had in him more than a tincture of realness, never could he have been beguiled by such quasi-process, but that he was hypnotized, and so extended or transferred his condition to others, that upon March 22nd, 1877, he had this earth bristling with telescopes, with the rigid and almost inanimate forms of astronomers behind him. And not a blessed thing of any unusuality was seen upon that day or succeeding days, but that the science of astronomy suffered the slightest in prestige couldn't. The spirit of 1877 was behind it. If in an embryo some cells should not live up to the phenomena of their era, the others will sustain the scheduled appearances. Not until an embryo enters the mammalian stage are cells of the reptilian stage false cells. It is our acceptance that there were many equally authentic reports upon large planetary bodies that had been seen near the sun. That of many, Leverrier picked out 6, not then deciding that all the other observations related to still other large planetary bodies, but arbitrarily or hypnotically disregarding or heroically disregarding every one of them. That to formulate all he had to exclude formulate at all he had to exclude falsely. The benumbment killed him, I think. I'm not at all inclined to place him with the Greys and Hitchcocks and Simmonses. I'm not, because though it was rather unsportsmanlike to put the date so far ahead, he did give a date, and he did stick to it with such a high approximation. I think Leverrier was translated to the positive absolute, the disregarded observation of July 26, 1819 by Gruthinson. That was of two bodies that crossed the sun altogether. Nature 14-469. That according to the astronomer J.R. Hind, Benjamin Scott, city chamberlain of London, and Mr. Ray had, in 1847, seen a body similar to Vulcan cross the sun. Similar observation by Hind and Lowe, March 12, 1849. Nature 14-504. Body of apparent size of Mercury seen January 29, 1860 by F.A.R. Russell and four other observers crossing the sun. De Vico's observation of July 12, 1837. L'Année Scientifique 1865-16. That another amateur astronomer, Mr. Combray of Constantinople, had written to Leverrier that upon the 8th of March 1865 he had seen a black point, sharply outlined, traverse the disk of the sun. It detached itself from a group of sunspots near the limb of the sun and took 48 minutes to reach other limb. Figuring upon the diagram sent by M. Combray, a central passage would have taken a little more than an hour. This observation was disregarded by Leverrier because his formula required about 4 times that velocity. The point here is that these other observations are as authentic as those of Leverrier included. That, then, upon data as good as the data of Vulcan, there must be other Vulcans. The heroic and defiant disregard, then, of trying to formulate one, omitting the others, which, by orthodox doctrine, must have influenced it greatly, if all were in the relatively narrow space between Mercury and the Sun. Observation upon another such body of April 4th, 1876, by M. Weber of Berlin. As to this observation, Leverrier was informed by Wolf in August 1876. It made no difference so far as can be known to this notable positivist. 2 other observations noted by Hind and Denning, London Times, November 3rd, 1871 and March 26, 1873, monthly notices of the RAS 20-10. Nope, 100. Itch. Probably a tick. Standicher, February 1762. Lynchburg, November 1762. Hoffman, May 1764. Dangos, January 18, 1798. Stark, February 12, 1820. An observation by Schmidt, October 11th, 1847, is said to be doubtful, but upon page 192 it is said that this doubt had arisen because of a mistaken translation, and 2 other observations by Schmidt are given, October 14th, 1849 and February 18th, 1850. Also an observation by Loft, January 6th, my birthday, 1818. Observation by Stenehibel at Vienna, April 27th, 1820. Haas had collected reports of 20 observations like Lescar-Bolt's. The list was published in 1872 by Wolf. Also, there are other instances like Gershentin's American Journal of Science 2-28-446 report by Pastoroff that he had seen twice in 1836 and once in 1837 2 round spots of an equal size moving across the sun, changing position relatively to each other and taking a different course, if not orbit, each time. That in 1834 he had seen similar bodies pass 6 times across the disk of the sun, looking very much like Mercury in his transits. March 22nd, 1876. But to point out Leverrier's poverty-stricken average, or discovering planets upon a 50% basis, would be to point out the low percentage of realness in the quasi-myth stuff of which the whole system is composed. We do not accuse the tech books of omitting these. Where'd my tongue go? Just give me a second. I had to burp. Excuse me. We do not accuse the textbooks omitting this fiasco, but we do note that theirs is the conventional adaptation here of all beguilers who are in difficulties. By diverting of attention, it wouldn't be possible in real existence with real mentality to deal with, but I suppose it's good enough for the quasi-intellects that stupefy themselves with the textbooks. Trick here is to gloss over Leverrier's mistake and blame Lescarbault. He was only an amateur, had delusions. The reader's attention is led against Lescarbault by a report from M. Lais, director of the Brazilian Coast Survey, who, at the time of Lescarbault's supposed observation, had been watching the sun in Brazil and, instead of seeing even ordinary sunspots, had noted that the region of the supposed transit was of uniform intensity. But the meaninglessness of all utterances in quasi-existence. Uniform intensity turns our way as much as against us, or someday some brain will conceive of a way of beating Newton's third law. If every reaction or resistance is or can be interpretable as stimulus instead of resistance, if this could be done in mechanics, there's a way open here for someone to own the world, specifically in this matter. Uniform intensity means that Lescarbault saw no ordinary sunspot, just as much as it means that no spot at all was seen upon the sun. Continue the interpretation of a resistance as an assistance, which can always be done with mental forces, making us wonder what applications could be made with steam and electric forces. We point out that invisibility in Brazil means parallax quite as truly as it means absence. And inasmuch as Vulcan was supposed to be distant from the sun, we interpret denial as corroboration, method, of course, of every scientist, politician, theologian, high school debater. So the textbooks, with no especial cleverness, because no especial cleverness is needed, lead the reader to contempt for the amateur of Ogris and forgetfulness of Leverrier, and some other subject is taken up. That's my cadence on this. I think that's how I feel comfortable. If you don't like it, probably shouldn't listen. It might change, but that's how I feel comfortable. It's like harnessing old Mr. fucking Fort. And I kind of like that. Let's keep going. But our own acceptance that these data are as good as ever they were. That if someone of eminence should predict an earthquake, and if there should be no earthquake at the predicted time, that would discredit the prophet, but data of past earthquakes would remain as good as ever they had been. It is easy enough to smile at the illusion of a single amateur. That's it. Got a chicken fence to build.